Hello and welcome to the One in a Many videocast with Rob Guzman. How are you doing today? I'm doing well. Well, as well as I can. I am well. How well I'm doing, I guess, is relative to the situation and others around me. So I've been getting a lot of questions, people asking me and my family, this whole coronavirus thing. What do you think? What do you think about it from a medical perspective, from a statistics and economics perspective? What do you think about it from a philosophic perspective? Is it overblown? Is it like the flu really, or is it totally different? Are we going to die? Am I at risk? Who else is at risk? Are children at risk? Is it old people? What should we do? Is it justified? How long will it last? Many, many questions. Unfortunately, I can't answer all of them. But what I decided to do was, because I got asked so many times by so many people, and because this is mostly for me too, to get this kind of out of my system and to kind of speak about it intelligently and to do what I can, which is to make a video and put my point of view out there. I've decided I'm going to take a different approach, and rather than go kind of freewheel, I actually organize my thoughts into a nice little presentation, which I'm going to share with you here. A couple of just disclaimers real quick. I'm not a virologist or a biologist. My brother works in genetics, and he's got a PhD in the field, but I do not. I was good at biology in school. I know a fair bit about viruses from back in the day. I've consumed a lot of media and a lot of articles and podcasts on this particular virus, so I've come to learn a lot about it. And so what I want to do, at least at the very beginning of this presentation, is give you kind of the facts as I see them and outline at a high level what is sort of fact established, what's not so established, and just give you some of the numbers, some of the statistics behind this. Now, I want to say, just again, another disclaimer, is that this topic is actually a very difficult topic. It's difficult for a number of reasons. One, it's an emergency. People are freaking out about it. So it's very hard to be objective about an emergency while you're in the middle of it. That's one fact. Another thing is that this is a particular technical subject that requires expertise in microbiology, virology, statistics to understand the spread and what's significant and what isn't, economics to understand what the market meltdown and all the things around that mean, and, of course, philosophy, understanding the epistemology, the ethics of an emergency, what should you do in this situation, and how should you see it. So what this presentation is going to be is about half, maybe a third, going over the facts of the case and establishing the context for this coronavirus crisis. And the rest is going to be my analysis. And it's going to be, a lot of them are first-hand observations that I've made. Some other people in the media have said them. I don't know who has said what exactly, but I do know that this is what I think, this is my view. So take away from it what you will. I hope my view becomes more mainstream, because I think one of the problems with this virus is there is a lack of perspective and context on the risks, and I think that's leading to crisis. So without further ado, let's go through the presentation. So in this video, I want to go over a couple of key questions just sort of to guide our presentation here. The first is, what is this thing? What is this virus? What are the facts around it? What should we do about it? That kind of thing. Just how dangerous is it? What's your risk of death? You personally. I don't know everybody on the video who's listening, but, hopefully you'll get a sense of that after walking away from this. And what do the reactions by the government and society say about this thing? What does it say about it philosophically, economically, and politically, about our society and about our government? And what would I do if I was in charge? So, without further ado, here we go. So some quick virus facts to get us all on the same page. So first, the coronavirus. People like to say that. Well, actually, coronaviruses are a family of viruses, of which there are 7. It's not just one virus. This virus, the novel coronavirus, also sometimes called COVID, although COVID actually is short for coronavirus disease, and then the 19 is actually because it started in 2019. That's the origin of the name COVID-19, as far as I can see. This virus is new, but coronaviruses as a family are not new to the human species. They get their name from a sun-like halo around the infected cells. It looks kind of like a sun corona around it. 4 of the coronaviruses that are known cause the common cold. So these are things that are spread and very widespread, and they don't go away easily. They run their course, but they are with us, what's known as an endemic disease. It comes back every so often. So more on that in a few seconds. So coronaviruses are distinct from influenza, which is another class of viruses, but they give similar symptoms and infection rates. They transmit in similar ways, so it's useful to compare them. It's not totally off base to compare this to the flu, which is what influenza is short for. The mortality rates are going to vary, but the transmission is very similar. The stability in the air and on surfaces is similar. Their symptoms in human beings that are both upper respiratory viruses that can cause death due to complications, including pneumonia. So they're very similar in the way they operate. Another key similarity is that both viruses are seasonal, or they tend to be seasonal, meaning that they are most active in the winter and the spring, and they don't do so well in the hot and humid weather. It spreads, of course, by droplets, air droplets that have moisture, liquid from your body, cells, infected cells, that travel about 6 feet on average. It's not an airborne pathogen, so what that means is like smallpox or measles or even tuberculosis, for example, those are airborne particles, meaning that they linger longer in the atmosphere, in the air. These droplets that are coronavirus-infected droplets tend to be heavier, and they fall to Earth faster by gravity. So they only last about 6 feet if you sneeze, say, in the air before they fall to the ground. If you're on an airplane, for example, your risk of catching coronavirus is only basically limited to the seats immediately behind you and in front of you. Beyond that, someone even who sneezes 2 seats behind you is very unlikely to reach you. That's not true, for example, for tuberculosis or for measles, which would put everyone on the plane at risk if that were the case. Oh, and one more thing. People who have the symptoms are more likely to transmit it. So that's a key observation as well, meaning you may have it and not show symptoms, but you're more likely to spread it if you have symptoms, meaning you're sneezing, you're coughing, you're emitting more fluids. So the virus can live on surfaces for 2 to 3 days, disinfect it as best you can, but this is not a virus that's going to last for a week. In ideal laboratory conditions, it could probably reach that long, but we're talking ideal laboratory conditions on an average day with, the weather we have and the rate of humidity and things like that. 2 to 3 days is really the max. So let's talk a little bit about mortality statistics. So this is, again, a very, very changing, very fluid situation. So the statistics that I'm going to be giving you are all coming from a dashboard created by Johns Hopkins University, which is one of the premier virology labs in the country. And they have put together a dashboard that combines statistics from countries all over the world, and it's updated in near real time. So they're basically giving a heat map, and they're giving statistics on the number of infected cases, the number of recoveries, the number of deaths. They break that down by country, and they break that down, by region and worldwide. So these statistics are going to change. When you watch this video, it'll be slightly different, and by the end of the week, it'll be totally different, I'm sure. But for now, this is as of today, March 18, 2020, at about 7:30 a.m. EST. There have been about 201,436 confirmed cases worldwide, with a death count, the number of people dead, this is worldwide again, of 8,006. So in this slide, what I'm going to be talking about is what's called the naive fatality rate. Naive meaning all we're going to do is simply divide the total number of deaths by the total number of confirmed infections, and that gives you a mortality rate. Now, I'm going to go into a few details in a little bit as to why that may not be the best indication of how fatal this is, but for what it's worth, that's a fatality rate, a naive fatality rate of about 3.9% worldwide. Now, that changes drastically depending on the country you're in. So, for example, in the U.S., we've had about 6,496 cases, so about 6,500 cases, confirmed cases, with a death count of 114. Just 114 people in the U.S. have died from this, and that's a naive fatality rate of about 1.75%. In Italy, which is the second highest hit country aside from China, there were 31,506 confirmed cases with a death count of 2,500. So that's a naive fatality rate much higher. It's about 7.9% in Italy. South Korea, the numbers are right there for you to see. The fatality rate there is 0.99%, so less than 1%, just shy of 1% in South Korea. And of course, in China, which is where this all began, they've been stable in terms of the number of new cases, but they still have a naive fatality rate of 3.99, just about 4% in China. Okay. So I'm going to continue with statistics. Now, it's useful to know at a high level how many people this affected worldwide, how many people were killed, how many people survived, and those sorts of things. But we also want to kind of drill into the demographics, right? As someone who works with data all the time, I'll tell you, you can lie easily, or at least mislead people with statistics, right? It's the proof is in the pudding, but the devil is in the details, to use two cliches, right? The devil is in the details, meaning you have to really look at it from a demographic perspective, okay? So the virus is not equally dangerous to all people. This is very important to note. In particular, it affects people the most who are either older, 60 years of age or older, or those who have pre-existing health conditions, especially lung conditions. Now, we have some data in China from the very beginning of this outbreak all the way till about, I think they stopped updating this data set maybe a week ago. So it's fairly current. They haven't had a lot of new cases since they released this data set. But based on China's data, which is fairly representative, 87% of the cases were in people ages 30 to 79. So 87% of cases, that is, people who are symptomatic, who are showing symptoms and infected between the ages of 30 and 79. So the vast majority are in that age range. That's a pretty big range, so let's talk a little bit more about the details there. So only 8% of the cases were people in their 20s. 1.2% teenagers. And this is an incredible statistic. 0.9% were age 9 or younger. In fact, in the data set I saw, only one child died of this in China. This is, over 70,000 cases. One child died. 70,000 cases, around 3,000 deaths, 3,200 deaths. Incredible, right? The fatality rate in people 80 or older was 14.8%. In 50-somethings, it was 1.3%. In 40-somethings, 0.4%. And in people ages 10 to 39, it was 0.2%. Now, what does that tell you? What does that tell you? Well, it tells you that this is really a disease that will make older people more likely to die. This is something that younger people, by and large, are not or should not be afraid of on their own terms, unless they have some kind of health issue. Weak kidneys, maybe a history of some kind of cancer in their body that makes it more immunocompromised. If they have lung issues, if they're smokers, right? If they drink a lot, if they don't sleep well, then their immune system will be weaker, and they may succumb. But most young people bounce right back. So for most young people, this really is something like the flu. It's a little bit more intense than the flu. It might keep you down for a few extra days, but in terms of mortality, we're looking at a very, very low chance of death for children and for people who are, let's say, 20 to 30, maybe 20 to 40. Once you get into the 50s, it goes over 1%. Now, even there, it's not the most outrageous number. I mean, the fatality rate of people 80 or older is 14.8%. Think about that. If you're in your 70s or in your 80s and you catch this thing, first of all, you're unlikely to catch it overall. You're less likely to catch it than you are to catch it. You're less likely to catch it than you are to not catch it. So, given that you do get it, you have about a 15% chance of death. Okay. Now, again, that's contextual. We don't know what percentage of those elderly people in the sample were smokers, right? China, a lot more smoking than the United States. Europe, a lot more smoking than the United States. So these are things, very important statistics to keep in mind. And this is a final point I'll make. I didn't include all the data above is from China's data set, but in Italy, approximately 89% of the deaths have been people over 70. So this adds more credence, more credibility to the idea that this is something that older people should be worried about. Now, I want to just go into some of the details of this naive versus real mortality rate that I was mentioning to you. So this virus has many of the same symptoms. as flu and cold. It's almost indistinguishable from those things unless you get tested, okay? And for many people, especially younger people, and by younger here, the context is people who are under 50, okay, and they're healthy, the effects are mild. As I was saying, it's like the flu, and hospitalization is not required, okay? What this means is that the number of confirmed cases is almost certainly smaller than it really is in all the prior statistics. Now, what that means is the fatality rate is inflated. Okay, it's inflated. Remember, our naive fatality rate was take the number of deaths, divide that by the number of confirmed cases. You get a naive fatality rate. If the number of confirmed cases goes up, because you have many, many undiagnosed cases, the fatality rate goes down. This is something that's known in some sense, in some cases, as severity-induced bias. What that means is this is a catastrophic event where people are coming out and there's a lot of panic. So we're hearing a lot about the extreme cases. We're hearing about people in ICUs. We're hearing about people who die in nursing homes. We're hearing about elderly people who are passing away from this and whose organs are failing. But the fact is that many, many cases are undocumented and undiagnosed. So the true fatality rate, your true risk of death, is really not well known or well understood. Now, experts understand this, of course, and I've seen a number of numbers given, or a series of numbers given by different experts. The expert that I trust on this the most is a guy by the name of Amesh Adalja, and he's been on NBC, CNN. He's been interviewed by Washington Post. He's been all over the map in the media, going over this virus and summarizing a lot of the slides I went over earlier, answering questions and whatnot. A lot of my data comes from him. A lot of my facts come from him. But based on his assessment and other experts like him, they believe the true mortality rate is below 1%, just because of, based on models projecting how many undocumented cases there are. And one figure I've heard is about 0.7% would be the true mortality rate. So, as always, we have to contextualize this. We have to contextualize the death rate. And one way to do that is by comparing it to the flu, because they are very similar in terms of the way they're transmitted, in terms of the way they operate. So let's go over some numbers for the flu. So in 2019 to 2020, so that's the flu season of this year, so last winter up till now in March, the CDC estimates between 22,000 and 55,000 flu deaths in the U.S. That's a pretty big range, but they have to deal with statistical ranges here because they don't know the actual numbers on the ground. And they have about 36 to 51 million predicted or estimated number of cases, million cases. That's a lot of people. That is hundreds of times more than the number of people who have died from this or contracted this. So that's just this year in terms of a flu season. In last year's flu season, they estimated about 34,200 deaths by flu. Okay, that's last year, so they have more evidence and they have one estimate as opposed to this year where they haven't finished the season, so they have some extra cushion there. So annually, the death rate by influenza is about 0.01%. Now, what that means is if you take the number of people who die from this and divide it by the number of cases, you get about 0.01%. Now, that's significantly lower than what the naive percentage for coronavirus is, but even the experts' assessment of it. Remember, the number I gave you earlier, right, was 0.7% was their best estimate, or one of their best estimates, and that would put it at about 70 times more dangerous than influenza. Now, however, not all influenza is equal. In 2009, you may have heard of the so-called H1N1 flu, which had a mortality rate of about 1%. So the mortality rate from H1N1 was actually higher than what the experts think coronavirus is going to be. Interesting. Now, SARS, which is another virus you hear about that's often compared to this, had a fatality rate that was close to 10%. But SARS is much harder to transmit. And one more point of comparison with the flu is the Spanish flu of 1918. Now, a lot of people talk about this. It's a huge historical event where people died en masse from flu. However, one thing that you got to keep in mind about the context there is that many of the deaths were due to secondary bacterial pneumonia, infections by secondary bacteria, because what would happen is you'd get the flu, would weaken your immune system. The flu wouldn't kill you, but then the secondary bacterial infections would. And at the time, there was no penicillin. Penicillin wasn't invented until the 1920s. So, you can look at that and say, wow, we could be like the Spanish flu, but not really, because, the situation is quite different. Another way to contextualize these death rates is to look at it country by country. So the virus has killed more people in Italy, and a lot of people are aware of that. But why? Why is that? Well, that's because Italy has the second oldest population in the world. Remember before I was telling you that age is a big factor here in determining whether this thing is going to be dangerous or not. And it's the second highest behind Japan. The median age in Italy is 46 years old. Italy's culture is also closer than Asian and American cultures. What I mean by that is that Italians tend to be better about hugging and kissing. They're much more touchy-feely than a lot of these other cultures. Asians tend to kind of keep to themselves. Same with American cultures, which has that kind of Protestant, Anglo-Saxon, uptight kind of feel to it. Grandparents and extended family tend to live with their grandchildren in Italy, so there's that vector as well. And thinking about cruises, this also explains why cruises have been so hot. It's because a lot of elderly go on cruises. Now, cruises, it's not the issue with cruises isn't just that you might get the virus. It's also, well, I'll be quarantined, I won't be able to dock, so how do I get back home? That's a different issue. We'll get to that later. Now, another thing is, comparing Italy and China with South Korea, you'll see there's a big difference, and it's not just because of age groups. It's also just because the fact their healthcare systems are different. You got to remember, China is a communist country, at least in name and mostly in practice. The same is true of, not the same, but they have a socialized healthcare system, a single-payer system. Italy also has a socialized healthcare system. And South Korea, though it has elements of socialism in their healthcare, it's a lot more free, just like the United States healthcare system is a lot more free. So that's going to be a point of comparison as well. Now, one more way you can contextualize this death rate is by comparing it to other things that could kill you. And one thing that might be useful to keep in mind is auto accidents. Now, in 2019, there were 38,800 traffic fatalities in the United States. That's over 100 people a day killed on the road in auto accidents. And one thing to note is that auto accidents kill fairly indiscriminately, unlike this virus, right? This virus, it's mostly older people, sick people. With traffic fatalities, it's old and young, male and female, sick and healthy, all more or less equally affected by traffic fatalities. If the media reported every traffic death the way they are with this virus, particularly in New York City, what would that do to the number of people who drive? And would it make sense to shut down the highways for a month because of a spike in traffic fatalities? I don't think it would. Now, of course, there are differences between traffic deaths and this. For one thing that I can think of, you can not drive and maybe minimize your death to traffic, but that's not a slam dunk. I mean, you ride public transit, that puts you at risk as well for auto accidents. You might be walking on the sidewalk and get hit by a car too, so it's not just that. But the point of this slide and the point of this comparison isn't to say that it's like auto accidents. It's to have you think objectively about the actual risk of this virus to you and put it into context and say, what other things in the world could kill me? But at the same time, I have to do. It's like driving. So now, experts' prognosis. I want to go over a couple of high-level conclusions. We have just, I think, this slide, maybe one more before we get into the analysis portion of the video. So now, experts' prognosis. It's likely that this disease will be dormant in the summer, and again, that's because of the fact that coronaviruses, like influenza, tend to be seasonal. Now, one thing I've heard said by many experts is that this virus cannot be contained. It spreads too efficiently among the population, and it's like the common cold in that way. And it will be what they're saying endemic. Now, endemic means it's basically with us all the time. It never really goes away. There's periods where it's less active and it's dormant, but then it comes back seasonally. And then you deal with it either by vaccination, which is how we deal with the flu, or we give children vaccines, injections when they're very young, and inoculate them for the rest of their lives, like polio, for example. So this is something that really containing isn't going to work on it. Now, Merkel of Germany last week, or was it the week before? I think it was last week, said, 70% of Germany could be infected by this thing. The UK said something like 90% of people could be infected. Amesh, the expert that I've gotten a lot of my information from, says that he estimates between 30 and 50% of the world population will be infected at some point this year with this virus. And the vast majority of these cases will be mild or non-existent. So this is yet again evidence that this is something you cannot hide from. You cannot put up walls. You cannot close your borders. You cannot just tell people to shelter in place and expect this thing to go away. This is going to be here with us for a long time. And we're some time away from vaccines. I mean, we're still at least 12 months away from a mass-produced vaccine. It's not just due to red tape, by the way, that's the case. It's also due to certain scientific problems, like ascertaining whether it works, whether there are side effects, and figuring out the proper dosage. Those are all things they still have to work out, and so we're quite some ways away from that. Now, again, the precautions for this thing are the same as those for the flu. Again, a very important and a very useful point of comparison is the flu because they're very similar. You wash your hands, you stay hydrated, you get plenty of sleep, and you avoid people that are sick. That's the best you can really do. Now, key takeaways from this fact-based portion of the video. The virus will likely have a worse fatality rate than the flu, probably on a par with H1N1. The true mortality rate is probably going to be somewhere between 0.6 and 1. I put 0.6 rather than 0.7 because I'm an optimistic guy. We don't really know. It's all speculation, but I would not be surprised if it was around H1N1's fatality rate of 1%. The danger of this virus to you is contextual. Healthy children are not in danger from this at all, nor are healthy people who are younger than 40. People in their 50s should be cautious, and people who are 60 or older are the most at risk. And again, even people in the oldest age group have a fatality rate of about 14%. So it's bad, but it's not like Ebola bad. It's not, like outbreak bad, where it's like a guarantee you will die from this thing. And we're beyond containment. That ship has sailed. You cannot put that genie back in the bottle, so mass quarantine is not justified. And I'll reiterate that over and over again in this video, but we'll get to that in a moment. So I want to take some time now to talk about more facts, just government reactions to this thing. The U.S. has banned travel for 30 days from Europe. Canada closed its borders, so we're not alone here. They have also done it in other countries. The EU has also put in place a law saying that they can't, or a restriction on traveling within Europe. People are trying to hunker down and block out travel from different countries to try and contain this thing. Again, misguided, but that's what they're trying to do. The Trump administration has pushed back taxes, so no longer due in April this year. They're going to be due, I think, in either July or June of this year. And it's considering a cash handout of $1,000 to all American taxpayers. Now, how that's going to be paid out, what the amount will be, etc., is unknown. It's still kind of an idea. We'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the economics portion of the video, but that's a fact that they're trying to do that. The last time I checked, it was 33. It could have gone up by then. I know the virus has now been appeared in all 50 states, but only 33 have closed schools officially, I believe. It could be close to all 50 now, but most places have closed their schools. Many states are ordering the closure of things like gyms, theaters, bars, restaurants. There's exceptions made for takeout and delivery, but that's the case in New York. It's the case in California. It's the case in Ohio. There are a lot of places that are doing this. The Trump administration has provided guidelines for the next 15 days. This was 3 days ago, about avoiding crowds and gatherings of about 10 people or larger. Of course, people coming to your home as family or as as a tight-knit thing, that isn't an issue. Like if your family is bigger than 10 people, they're not going to throw you in jail. But they're telling you to avoid crowds and events, gatherings of 10 people or larger. The most controversial of all the things I'll mention here, I think is kind of insane, is that San Francisco has ordered its people to shelter in place and not leave their homes except for essentials for the next 3 weeks. Israel has done something similar, and New York City is considering the same. I put New York there, but I meant to write the little C, New York City. I live in New York, but not New York City, so I would be, quite amiss if it were applied to me. And of course, just to throw in there, Pennsylvania has banned the sale of alcohol. Now, there's going to be a lot of other crazy things that governments have been doing. I can't report on all of them because we don't have unlimited time. But I threw that in there because I want to point out that measures being taken by the government range from sensible to we want more power. We want more control. This is a great crisis. We're going to take advantage of it. And I think that has to be watched. We'll get into that more in the politics analysis portion of the video, but that's what's been done. The public reaction. So apart from the government, what do the people think? So the stock market has taken its worst hit since 1987. There are talks of a recession and even a depression as the Fed has slashed rates to zero. People are hoarding toilet paper, hand sanitizer, water, paper towels, and other goods. Grocery stores are having trouble keeping up. This is a complete hysterical panic buying event. Many people have been laid off or they've lost time at work if they're hourly. A lot of small business owners are in deep trouble as well. One example, my landscaper, he came by last night. We paid him because he did his job. And he's saying that portions of New Jersey have closed his business essentially, saying he can't go do jobs there, even if they've ever been agreed to, because they're outlawing all non-essential businesses. In addition to that, he's told me the same thing is in the works for New York, and his company has already taken out huge amounts of money from Home Depot and other places to stock. He's a new business. He's a landscaper, and now he's instructed his wife to put all auto payments on hold. They're hoping they have enough money to last them the next month to buy groceries and food, and it's a disaster. I mean, small businesses are going to be shuttering their doors because of this. Cruises, airlines, casino, and restaurant industries have all made overtures they need a bailout from the government. And there's anxiety everywhere. Tempers are flaring. People are arguing over whether this is an overkill, whether it needs to be even more severe. I'm definitely in that first camp by like 1,000%. It's causing a lot of friction, and I think people are very at the end of their rope, so to speak. So now we're going to get into the portion of the video which is me analyzing this event. This is no longer just fact-based, me spewing, Associated Press and NPR press briefings. This is my analysis, my observations of what's going on, and some points that I think I want to make clear to you, the viewer, as you go through this process of whether you're sheltering in place, whether you're just hiding out in your home for a few weeks, whether you're a required person to work, like a police officer or a medic, and you're going through your day-to-day and you're inundated with people and cases. These are things for me to give to you to think about apart from the virus itself. So let's first talk about economics. There's going to be 3 portions to this analysis: economics, a short bit on psychology and psychological stuff, and then politics. So the first thing is you hear about price gouging in times of emergency. There's a guy on Amazon with 17,000 bottles of hand sanitizer he purchased. And the idea is that this is bad. This is a horrible thing, and this guy should be penalized for it. He shouldn't be allowed to sell it. He had to donate all that hand sanitizer. Well, the fact is that price gouging is a good thing, and that's going to surprise a lot of you, but hear me out. Price gouging, so-called, is really just adjustment of price to supply. It's an adjustment of supply and demand, and it ensures that supply meets demand. So extra money per unit that you give the supplier to buy something that's very scarce, they can now use to build their capacity. So if you're worried about toilet paper, and toilet paper supplies are dwindling, rather than hold the toilet paper price down below its market price, which is based on demand, right? Lots of people want it. Rather than hold that price down, what you should do is let the price go up. If the price, say, doubles to toilet paper, people are not going to buy as many units, for one thing. So the shortage won't happen. You'll have people who, okay, if they have a choice between, I've bought 3 rolls of toilet paper and now I want to buy a 4th and it's going to cost me $12 a roll to get it, then I'm not going to spend that kind of money on toilet paper. I'll wait. I have enough at home. Maybe I have 40 rolls, maybe I have 10 rolls, whatever it is. I'll come back in a week when supply has gone up. In the meantime, people who really need it, who don't have any rolls, are willing to pay that $12 to get that roll of toilet paper. So you avoid that panic buying, that person with the shopping cart who's got 80 different rolls of toilet paper. And, the stores, the other way to do this is for stores to limit the number that are purchased. But that's not going to help either. It's still going to result in a run on toilet paper because people are just going to simply come back. They're going to have their friends go in and buy them a roll. And then it's also first come, first serve. It's going to be chaos. It's going to be bedlam. People are basically going to be at a point where they queue up outside of grocery stores to buy toilet paper. Whereas if you let the price go up and adjust, then that won't happen. So it's really anti-price gouging laws that lead to rationing and shortages, and it penalizes the people who think ahead in order to prop up those who don't. So I think it's wrong to have anti-price gouging laws. I am pro-price gouging, especially in times of emergency. The other thing to note is Americans in savings is an issue. So most people, if you look at a lot of news stories before this crisis came out, there were surveys and polls of people like asking, are you going to be able to afford an emergency that costs you $5,000 or $3,000? Most Americans can barely afford $1,000 for a medical emergency, let alone live for 2 weeks with no income, sheltered indoors. So people who are talking about hunkering down for 2 weeks clearly don't understand the economic situation of most Americans. I mean, this is something that is a red alert disaster for them. They are living paycheck to paycheck. They don't have the money in savings for a medical emergency. And hopefully when this is all over, that changes. People's attitudes change. I doubt it because people don't always listen to reason, especially in our culture, which I'll get to later. But, this is something to keep in mind, that this is kind of playing out before our eyes. All these people who live paycheck to paycheck, even if they make good money, are in for a huge problem. The next thing in the economics realm I want to talk about is that this incident has really shown me, at least, and it should show everybody. I already knew this in a sense, but this is like a clear-cut example of it. Appreciation for the supply chain. Now, what is the supply chain? Supply chain refers to the distribution of goods and services across economies, across different countries, different states, different companies, and it's a difficult science. People take it for granted that when they go to a CVS or a Walgreens, that what they are looking for is going to be there. But think about it. I mean, you have to predict the buying habits of everybody in the economy. You have to figure out how much it's going to cost you in raw materials. You don't want to overproduce because if you buy too much of something, if it's perishable like food, it will go bad. If it's not perishable, you get a little luck in that you can store it, but there are storage costs associated with that. And then, you may not make your money back. You may buy 100 units of something and only sell 50 and you're down, you're down what you sold, right? So I studied this when I was in school. It's a sub-discipline of operations research, supply chain management. And, one example that they taught us and that I've heard is consider a pencil. A pencil is this little thing you would think it's really easy to make and really easy to come by, but pencils have many, many different components. They've got rubber for the eraser. They've got metal for the little belt of the eraser at the bottom. It's wood, and it's also got lead inside of it, and it's all put together in a very specific way. Making a pencil requires at least 4 different inputs and manual labor to assemble the thing, as well as whatever machines are used to cut those things into shape. So even something little like a pencil, a great deal goes into producing it, and let alone a computer or a phone or a lamp or a desk or a chair or a car or anything else that you're going to buy. So hopefully the fact that people are seeing shortages and they're going to these stores and finding like they're bare, it helps them realize that this is something not to be taken for granted. And unfortunately, the last point under the economics analysis is that depression is almost certainly on the way. All right, with the amount of money the Fed is injecting into the economy, with the amount of money the government is spending on bailouts, potentially, this cash giveaway that they're going to give, it's Keynesianism, right? It's the economics of prime the pump. It's let's have the government spend our way out of this. The problem with that is that money that the government is spending comes out of taxes. And if it doesn't come out of direct taxes, what happens is they print money. And what that does is it devalues the money that already exists, which is essentially equivalent to a tax. So the money that people have in savings that's going to be used to open businesses and invest in capital goods is going to go towards consumption. Short-term consumption to alleviate people's pain points. That's going to lead us almost certainly into a depression. I would say 100% likely it's going to be a recession. I would put it at like 70 to 80% odds that it's going to be a depression. Now, how bad a depression, how long, I have no idea. We'll see. But this is awful. A very bad development for the economy. Now, that leads me to psychology, psychological effects of this crisis. Now, this crisis is going to be bad for everybody, but especially people who are mentally ill or depressed. I mean, people already feel alone when they're in that situation, but whether they're old or young, if you're quarantined for a long period of time, it's going to be awful. I mean, you're going to feel disconnected from other people. The sense of control is already low, but as the government edicts melt away the economy, what's left of it, and you lose your routine, it's just going to get worse. And I would say you should watch the suicide rate this year. I imagine it's going to be a lot higher, unfortunately. So bad news. Bad news all around. Let's get into some of the politics now of all this. Now, my first point is Sandernistas, Bernie Sanders supporters. Have you enjoyed your first week of socialism? Was it everything you wanted it to be? I mean, this crisis really is like a Bernie Sanders dress rehearsal or dry run, as they say. If we were to ever implement true socialism, it would mean the end of all the things that you're seeing the end of right now. Private businesses, bars, gyms, restaurants, government crackdowns, curfews, people being able to go only certain places, spend money at certain times, go to only essential locations. Apart from this initial panic stage of people buying up what they can and people not knowing if they have enough money and goods to survive, it'll be followed up by military appropriation, redistribution of goods from the haves to the have-nots. That's what socialism is. That's what it means in practice. What you're seeing right now is hysteria driven partially by fear of the virus, but it's also fear of running out of money, running out of goods, running out of stuff. And if you compound that with the huge act of violence that comes after that initial panic phase, you've got socialism. So if you voted for Sanders in the primaries, if you're wearing the Bernie shirt, if you love Che Guevara, if you're one of those people, think twice unless you're really enjoying what's happening right now. That's what it means in practice. And it leads eventually to Venezuela. The same is true of environmentalism. Now, environmentalists hate productivity in industry. A true environmentalist will likely look at this crisis and say, well, at least there's fewer people and less consumption going on. At least there's less driving, less fossil fuels being burned. That's good for the environment. I mean, this is also a dry run, just as it is for a Bernie Sanders presidency, as the Green New Deal. I mean, you've already got Democrats coming out the woodwork saying this whole stimulus they want to pass, all this cash giveaway, is proof that we can afford a Green New Deal. No, we can't. We can't afford the cash giveaway either. But that's beside the point. Right now, people are going to die not because of the virus, but because of huge, staggering unemployment and lack of production. And that's what the Green New Deal would do without a virus imposing it on us. So I have a quote here from an environmentalist, David Graeber. Now, I've read a lot of environmentalist books and articles. I'm a firm advocate of the idea that you should know your enemy, and I view environmentalism as a real enemy of humanity. And it's an enemy of capitalism and free markets, but it's also an enemy of just production and human achievement and everything good that I value. So I like to stay on top of them. And here's a direct quote. "We have become a plague upon ourselves and upon the earth. It is cosmically unlikely that the developed world will choose to end its orgy of fossil fuel energy consumption, and the third world its suicidal consumption of landscape. Until such time as Homo sapiens should decide to rejoin nature, some of us can only hope for the right virus to come along." David Graeber. It speaks for itself, doesn't it? He wrote this in the 90s, but I mean, think of it right now in the context of this virus. Hey, David, do you think this is the right virus? I mean, it's clearly what you were lusting for back when you wrote that. Maybe you didn't know exactly what it entailed. I disagree. I think you did. Many of your followers probably didn't. But now we all see what it is, what it would be like. Now, one other thing, and this is the last bullet on this page, you can rest assured as you go through the store shelves, picked clean by people in the panic of this virus, at least you've lost all that reusable, clean, fairly sterile disposable plastic bags here in New York. You can walk around with your reusable, microbial-infested canvas bag and know that you're doing your part to help make humanity extinct by transmitting germs and pathogens, picking things off the shelves and putting them into a bag after many people have touched the same thing. And then what are you going to do? Wash that bag every day? How much energy are you going to burn using that? How much soap are you going to use? How much heat are you going to use? How much electricity are you going to use? That affects the environment too. This gets back to the plastic bag ban, which isn't the subject of this video, by the way. But the fact is that it's amazing, isn't it? How just as they pass this bill and think that they've got a victory on their hands, this happens. And hopefully people will put two and two together and realize that these people are not friends of humanity. These people being the environmentalists who want to ban your bags. Now, another fact about this crisis is that people are far more totalitarian now than they used to be. Now, when I say used to be, I mean probably back in the early 2000s, not so much in the 30s. There were a lot of totalitarians around back then, obviously. But this reaction, this panic, was not happening back in 2009 with H1N1, and we already established that there were a lot of people killed by that, and it had a high mortality rate of 1%. The WHO, the World Health Organization, is praising China and holding them up as a model. China, communist, authoritarian China as a model. And you can see it on social media. On Facebook, I've seen people write, it's not about how you feel. It's about how everybody feels, or it's about how what the government needs to do to keep you safe. It's not about how you feel. And people in New York City, in articles I've read, yelling out their windows at people on the sidewalk, go home and flatten the curve. Flatten the curve. We'll get to that in a moment, but clearly there's little opposition here to government edicts to close businesses and livelihoods over a virus that's very little risk to most people. This is expected now because people support unlimited economic nationalism. They are coming back to the idea that socialism is good, and many are even going to saying they want communism in the United States. We have literally handed our lives over to philosopher kings who know. They may know something about viruses and virology, but they don't know anything about supply chain management, nothing about economics. They don't know anything about statistics. They don't know anything beyond their purview. And what they're doing is passing edicts, or at least encouraging edicts, to be done that maybe will address the pandemic, maybe, after some amount of time has gone, but at huge expense. And we'll get to that expense in a moment. Now, the fear right now, this is the next point, is not so much about what the virus will do. It's about what the government's going to do. Now, the essence of totalitarianism is that it's arbitrary, it's unpredictable, it's non-objective. Now, most people are more afraid of measures like what's happened in San Francisco and what de Blasio is considering now in New York City. That will lead to panic, riots. It'll lead to people being extremely unhappy with what's going on because they don't know when it will end. People aren't traveling not because they're afraid of viruses, but because they're afraid of being stranded. They're hoarding supplies, not because they think they're going to need 80 rolls of toilet paper to deal with the virus. It's because they're afraid of looting, civil unrest, and industrial collapse. People are being quarantined with no end in sight, very little income, and loss of their jobs. There's going to be a huge amount of suffering done by what they're trying to do to deal with this virus. And those people won't be featured in the media so much as the 8th victim in the small town who has coronavirus, and who, by the way, makes a complete recovery in a week. What's going to happen is you're going to see baristas, restaurant owners, waiters, jazz musicians, writers, even shopkeepers losing their industries, losing their jobs, and losing their livelihoods. And meanwhile, the bureaucrats are just going to pat themselves in the back that they did the right thing and they avoided the end of civilization. Well, I'm sorry, this thing wasn't going to end civilization. It never was going to end civilization. You, however, the government, may end civilization. So, something to keep in mind. Now, another point. This incident has also should show everybody, but it's even more example to me that government is just too involved in industries like education, healthcare, and everything else. The attitude is, let's never let a good crisis go to waste. And what's happened is people have been on the hook all weekend and all week for what the government's going to do with regard to schools, with regard to hospitals, and everything else. Now, what's interesting is the people who are running the show, like de Blasio in New York City, admitted that we can't really close the schools because we need to feed the hungry poor kids and we need to babysit them for their parents. Admitting, essentially, that New York City public schools aren't so much about giving kids education, but as serving as essentially a Meals on Wheels and welfare program for people who are lower class. That is what it's about. And governors and mayors throughout the country are using this as an excuse to further increase their control of the economy. Another point. In this whole affair, the government has shifted in its role from being a protector of individual rights to what I'm calling a patriarchal guarantor of your health. This propaganda about flattening the curve, and it is propaganda, has nothing to do with has nothing to do with saving you as an individual from dying or getting sick. It has nothing to do with that. It's all about distributing healthcare efficiently to the masses and flattening out the curve so that hospitals can not erect more beds and not be overwhelmed. The fact is, this drops the context of what's going on, what's good or bad for the individual. What these people are doing is essentially shutting down 90% of the economy to prop up the healthcare industry and protect it from being overwhelmed. And it's because government regulates the heck out of that industry and it can't really react to market pressure, which is what this is. So this whole flatten the curve thing has nothing to do with keeping you safe. It's with keeping the healthcare industry safe. And this is a very important point. There is no moral right. You have no moral right to be free from exposure to disease. Every individual is responsible for managing his own risk, and it's not the place of the government to issue commandments in the name of public health. Consider a concert as an example. If young people want to go during this time, I say let them go. If old people are afraid and don't want to go, or if they're sick, they can choose to stay home, and they can avoid the people who went. Why would you coercively shut down the concert rather than let people choose if they want to go based on their own risk preferences? It doesn't make any sense to me. This is, again, the government stepping in and telling us that it knows better what is good for us than we do. And that is not the role of government, and that is not the American philosophy of government. Now, that's the end of my analysis period, so I want to kind of leave you guys with a couple of just quick slides that I'll go through, some remaining questions to be answered. How long will this last? Will new facts about the virus come to light? These are things to keep in mind as we go forward. How will things look economically once this ends? Will these measures, the coercive, controlled measures, be immediately lifted? I don't know. How will it affect the election? Again, I don't know. These are questions I can't answer. I don't think anybody can answer them. But we can keep our eye on the horizon and see if new answers come to light. Now, this is more for you guys at home. What can you do? What can you do to improve your life here and deal with this crisis? This is my advice to you. I say you create a routine and stick to it, even if that's making your bed or picking out clothes to wear. You have to establish some semblance of control over the situation, even if it's minor, because your sanity is going to depend on it. You have to keep your strength up. Don't eat a lot of garbage or drink. Don't lose a lot of sleep. Try to get to bed at a reasonable time. Eat healthy vegetables and fruits. Eat meats. Eat healthy food. Get exercise if you can. Drink a lot of water. You don't want to get sick during this period because your health is going to be required for you to fight back as things get better. Stay hydrated and healthy, and if you're sick, seek help. If you have a fever, that's the number one indicator that you're sick. I would say shortness of breath and fever are the two symptoms that are saying most characterize this disease. So if you experience those, you should get tested. Keep in touch with loved ones over the phone and the internet. Use the digital medium. This is a wonderful invention of mankind that allows us to bond across great distances and over troubled periods like this where everyone's quarantined. Use it. Call that old friend of yours that you haven't spoken to in a while. Talk to him for an hour on the phone. Ask him how he's doing. Talk about the good times. Talk about what you're going to do when this is all over. You have to set up a projection in your head for the idea that life will go on when this is through. And only you can do that for yourself. I can't give that to you. You have to go out and do it. So reach out to others and don't stay isolated. Save money as best as you can. Don't spend frivolously. And if you're in distress, call the billers. Call your credit card company. Call your mortgage company. Call your water and electric company. Call them and ask them for deferred payments, even if it means you have to pay more because of interest. Don't go bankrupt because of this. Keep your eye on the prize. This thing should be over, hopefully, within the next couple of weeks to month, and hang in there. Final words, words of wisdom, hopefully. If I was president, I would repeal the injunctions that close businesses and encourage young and healthy people to go back to work. Encourage the closings, but don't force them on people. Give people the option. Encourage old people or those with compromised immune systems to quarantine themselves. Their families should be mindful about visiting those individuals while they have symptoms. I would remove all the red tape on the production of a vaccine and ensure that there are plenty of tests available. And I would instruct nursing homes and other areas where there are many elderly to separate their elderly patrons and encourage hospitals to prioritize older people who may be sick. These are all things they need to do if they're going to get through this thing. Now, this is a total disaster. I think it's been mishandled by nearly every government, except for the UK, which is trying to do something like isolating the elderly without closing the entire economy down. But it's under pressure to screw that up too, because other countries want them to fail, or at least want them to follow this path of failure. Now, the last thing I'll say on this from the slideshow is that the damage that this is doing is going to take years, if not decades, to repair. And that's damage not just to the economy and to people's health, but to people's trust and to people's security in what they can do in their lives. So, not the best message to end on, but unfortunately, it's the truth. So that's the end of the slideshow. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a lot out of it. You can like this video if you thought it was helpful. Share it with others if you think it's helpful. take my analysis to heart. Take what I have to say at heart. If you disagree, feel free to share in the comments why you disagree. Note that I'm not downplaying this virus. I do think it's a threat. I do think it's something you should be concerned about, but I don't think it justifies shutting down the whole freaking economy over. I don't think that at a time of crisis, when there's run on basic essentials, when people are losing their jobs, when there's panic that there won't be enough resources and money around, the worst thing you can do is shut down production. And that's what the government's done. So the governors have to really get this under control and roll back what they're doing. If you're in this with me and you agree, write the president, whitehouse.gov, write to him and share him. Send him this video if you need to. Send him whatever you need to tell him, listen, President Trump, whatever senators you call or whoever is going to listen, stop this. Stop this ridiculous quarantine order. Don't destroy the economy over this. Follow a path similar to Britain. And instead of this propaganda of flattening the curve, tell people this is an endemic virus. It will be endemic. It will infect probably 30 to 50% of the world population when all is said and done. It's a part of life. And just like every other part of life, you cannot stop the rest of your life because of this. So stay strong out there. Stay connected. I hope you all remain healthy and safe and enjoy the rest of your day. I hope the next video I make will be under better circumstances and better conditions. Hopefully this is the last I have to speak of about this virus in particular. And hopefully my next video isn't going to be about, well, welcome to authoritarianism, which will then get censored and then I might get taken off the air permanently. Who knows? Have a good rest of your day. See you later.